Neil Harris going was not one I expected. We've had a couple of statements released by the club. We should also point out this seems very amicable. It's a mutual agreement. And perhaps the most peculiar part of all about this is Neil Harris is actually going to be in charge of Millwall's next two games against Sheffield United at home on Wednesday night and then against Middlesbrough at the weekend as well, which is not something I can ever recall happening, Justin.
Yeah, it is an odd one. And as you say, it's very amicable. You know, it's a bit like splitting up with your other half, but still living in the house sort of thing.
To look after the kids. That kind of thing.
Make sure the kids are all right, make sure everything's in order before you find somewhere new, if you like. Obviously, Neil Harris isn't going to move on that quick. But yeah, I think it speaks of the relationship between Neil Harris and the football club. And also the strangeness of the situation for him to leave now, because the club's, I think, is in a steady position. I know they're not winning four games, but you know that run of winless 4 games came off the back of winning 4 games on a trot. So yeah, a bit of a strange one, but you know, you'd imagine his post-game comments at the weekend probably points to some frustration from his perspective.
Well, we'll talk about that very shortly, Justin. We've got a statement here from the chairman, James Berylson at Millwall. He said, "I want to thank Neil for all his efforts since returning to the club, and we will be forever grateful to him for that. After discussions with Neil in recent days, he felt it was the right time to step down from the role following the Middlesbrough game, and I have accepted his decision. As we look forward, the appointment of our next head coach will align with the clear strategy and vision I have previously laid out for the future of Millwall Football Club, both on and off the pitch." And Harris, to kind of summarise that this is a very amicable thing that's happening here, Neil Harris has put out an open letter. He has said, "This isn't an easy decision. As everyone knows, this club is more than a job to me. It's my club and always will be. Being here always felt like home as a player, as a captain and as a manager. We are a family and it's been my life for so many years. But I always said when I returned that I would leave when the time felt right. And now is that time." Yeah. Why do you think now is that time, Justin? What do you think has made Neil Harris think that is the case?
I think he's probably frustrated at the lack of incomings. I mean, he pointed to that in the summer, didn't he? He was very frustrated with the transfer strategy in the summer by they didn't strengthen as much as they needed to, and the depth is showing. I mean, Sean Hutchinson was released by the club and then re-signed partly through pre-season, so that's another. You know, it shows you where the club's at the moment. They did make some good signings. Jaffa Tanganga was one, Femi Aziz is another, but it wasn't enough to really bolster the squad. And you could sense that frustration from Neil Harris over the summer. And I think that seeped into this season in Championship. I think their form has been good. I think them being 11th at the moment, they're overachieving. They're one of the smallest resources in the division. And I think that's telling of their overachievement. And again, Neil Harris came into firefight last season, took them in a really good direction, finished the season strongly, and that carried over into this season. So for them to be in the top half, I think is a great achievement. But I think he's very frustrated at perhaps the direction of the club from upstairs, and maybe upstairs being the owners, board, etc. They maybe have one eye on taking the club in a direction they intended to take it in with Joe Edwards as well. So there's probably a clash of strategies, if you like, from both manager and board.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said there, Justin. I think, first of all, full credit to Neil Harris, because we were massive Neil Harris skeptics, weren't we? And maybe we still are to an extent. And heading into this season, I think we were both a bit concerned about Millwall and them having Neil Harris in charge. Didn't expect them to do as well as they have done, and he certainly proved a lot of people wrong, including us, with how they've done so far. But maybe there's kind of a sense from him that he thinks he won't be able to take Millwall to that next level. If that is the case, then that's a very honourable thing for him to think. Whether it is the case or not, I don't actually know. But he has, as you say, mentioned loads of times about how frustrated he is about the state of the squad, how he thinks Millwall are a club who could get to that next level, but just aren't capable at the moment because of the depth and quality that's in the squad, including the comments that he made at the weekend where he did call the fans, he called a section of Millwall fans, I should say, thickos, but that was because he was saying if you take the 2 centre-backs and Romain Essa out of the team, then it's a pretty bang average squad, is essentially what he was saying. So, yeah. I mean, Berylson's comments are interesting in itself, because it'll be very interesting to see what route Millwall go down next. I think, just on the thickos thing, Justin, do you think that's actually had some sort of an effect here? Whether his frustrations kind of spilt over and Millwall have said to him, Neil, you can't be saying that. And then they've said things have gone back and forth, and it's just led to Harris saying, right, I've had enough, time for me to go.
Yeah, you're very much reading between the lines with it all, but I think that's what this makes the timing of this decision so strange and bizarre, is because the club's not performing poorly. Performances aren't terrible. Yes, they aren't scoring a lot of goals. They're not really creating as many chances as they were earlier on this season in the last few games. But I think it's just frustration from all counts. And as I say, I think, I mentioned at the weekend that Millwall fans can be very unforgiving. And it's perhaps the owners getting in front of a situation that could spiral, because that frustration is not going to go away for Neil Harris, is it? The squad's not going to improve overnight. Or Millwall going to go and chuck a load of money at signings in January? Probably not. Might get one or two loan signings. I know Romain S has been linked with the move away to Crystal Palace as well, which again might frustrate Neil Harris even more, because will that money being reinvested if he does leave, sort of thing. So I think it's it's just been the tip of a volcano that's probably been bubbling for the past 3 or 4 months.
Will a new manager come in and make them play as well as they have done so far this season, Justin? I suppose that's the next question to look at here. I will point out, since James Berylson has been in charge of the club, of course, we know why that is the case, and that's very tragic why that has happened. But since he's been in, Millwall's stability, because they've always come across me as a very stable kind of club,
sensible.
who always, it's very sensible, don't make too many calamitous decisions. But since he's been in charge in the last 18 months or around that time, they have made some eyebrow-raising decisions. I would have said Neil Harris being appointed was one of those eyebrow-raising decisions initially. Maybe that's one that's actually been okay when you look at it in hindsight. Joe Edwards was the other one, which obviously didn't go very well at all, Justin. So will they try and roll the dice with another manager like Joe Edwards, do you think? It's certainly going to be very interesting to see.
I think it's such a risk to do this now, because I'm just looking at the table and, it doesn't strike me with confidence that Millwall couldn't get sucked into a relegation battle. You saw how the difference in 2 centre-backs and Romain S can make on that Millwall team. They were hammered by Coventry and 1-0, didn't do that game too much justice at the weekend. Millwall on 25 points. They're only 8 points off the bottom 3. A poor December can drag them right into it. And I think a Neil Harris Millwall presents me with a lot more confidence, having what I've seen this season, in that they're not going to concede a lot of goals. They're going to be difficult to beat and break down. And not having him in charge is such a huge risk, because, like you said, James Berylson's decision-making in Joe Edwards, whilst it was ambitious, was a poor decision, and they had to go back to type in Neil Harris to recover what was what turned out to be a bad decision. And again, the main issues that the squad has got is it lacks quality in the final third. Macaulay Langstaff's got 1 goal this season. Josh Coburn's struggling to get minutes. Duncan Watmore's the main source of goals, and he's got 5 this season. It's not a nice situation at Millwall for a new manager to walk into. I think it's a stable club, and that's good. That's a huge positive. But the squad is missing so many players. There are injuries to key personnel as well. That I think a new manager who's going to come in who doesn't know the squad is going to have a hard time finding results. I really do think that. And
worth remembering that when Neil Harris came in, Millwall were very much in danger of going down, weren't they, because of how disastrously that Joe Edwards spell went. So that's why I say it's going to be so fascinating to see who they do bring in. And you're absolutely right. If you take out Tanganga, Cooper and Essa out of that team, I mean, as you said earlier, Essa has been linked with a move to Crystal Palace. If he were to leave in January, that would be a huge blow for Millwall. So if that is the case for them moving forwards, then that would leave them in a bit of a perilous position, no matter who the manager is, unless that manager does really pull off something outstanding, which, considering, as we say, how the decision making has been since James Berylson's been in charge, whether that's the case or not, I will point out James Berylson may not have been the one who instigated the Joe Edwards appointments, because there was other people in charge of at Millwall as well, but it's certainly been him who's been in charge when these interesting decisions have been made. And I suppose, going back to that, you could also throw in Gary Rowett's departure as well, as one which, things haven't gone very well since he left either. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where Millwall go next. Of course, they don't have to worry about the next 2 games, because that's when Neil Harris is still going to be in charge for these 2. I suppose, looking at him though, Justin, I'm very interested to see where he goes next, because he has said now he thinks it's the right time for him to go. I'm sure he thinks his stock will have risen after the job that he's done at Millwall, and maybe that is the case, but I would be surprised if he got another championship job. I don't know about you.
It depends what the club who may need him finds himself in situation-wise. I think if you need a manager who's going to come in and galvanise a squad of players and guide them away from a relegation battle, and essentially make them overperform for a short period of time, I think Neil Harris is a good appointment. You got to remember when he took over at Cardiff from Neil Warnock all those years ago, they were sitting around sort of mid-table, lower mid-table. Neil Harris got them into the playoffs. And then it went tits up the following season. And then you look at last season, he came in and took Millwall into sort of mid-table. So, he's a manager who showed that he can come in and firefight. So there's a club who needs him. For example, Cardiff, again, weirdly. If they find themselves in the relegation battle, 6 games to go, or 8 games to go, or whatever, then Neil Harris might be a good appointment. But I think with Neil Harris, he's shown me that he can make tweaks to his style of football. They don't have to be boring, sit deep and head the ball away. They can get at teams. They can press high. You only have to look at the chance creation earlier on in the season. They are one of the top performing teams, and they've been very sturdy at the back as well. So Neil Harris has found a nice balance there. I just don't think the quality of the squad has allowed him to get the results, perhaps the performances the team has deserved this season. And maybe, just maybe, he can really solidify himself elsewhere.
Yeah, maybe us and other championship neutrals have unfairly put him in a category of kind of a dinosaur kind of manager with his style of play, when that may be a completely unfair thing for us to do. And maybe he will get another championship at this job this season and continue to prove people wrong. I mean, he did have the 2 spells before, didn't he, at Cambridge and Gillingham, wasn't it, after dropping down a couple of levels. So for him to come back to the championship and do as well as he has done, I think you've got to take your hat off to him for that. So it'll be interesting to see where he does rock up next. We were talking just a second ago about Millwall and how they're going to look for the rest of the season. Well, it's interesting seeing what SBK, our friends there, what their odds are saying for Millwall. They're currently 9-2 to finish in the top 6, 14-1 to be promoted, 43-1 to be relegated, Justin. Which I will admit has made me raise an eyebrow at the relegation price, to say the very least. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating old time seeing how Millwall get on post Neil Harris, and particularly with who they get in. Justin, is there anything else that you want to particularly add about this saga that's developed in the past hour or two?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've already mentioned it. The quality of the squad does worry me a lot. I think Neil Harris was getting more out of it than perhaps many might realise. And the fact that they sit 11th, have only lost 5 games this season, is really impressive. So post Neil Harris at Millwall is going to be very, very interesting. And this is probably a really bad time to sack a manager when you're not doing too badly either. You're going into December when you've got a lot of games to play. You're asking a lot of a new man to come in, or an interim manager. It is such a risk, such a risk.
Well, this Wednesday night is going to be Neil Harris's final home game in charge of Millwall. So I'm sure we'll get a rousing reception there before they go to Middlesbrough away at the weekend. So certainly going to be a game to keep an eye on. In any case, it's a tricky old game with it being Sheffield United, but the Den. Difficult place to go, as we always say, isn't it? We'll see if that's the case post Neil Harris, because that will be very, very interesting. Otherwise, ladies and gents, this has been the Second Tier Podcast. We'll be back again on Thursday for a midweek roundup of all the action from across the Championship with the midweek games. So we look forward to seeing you then for that. This has been the Second Tier Podcast. I've been Ryan Dilks.
I've been Justin Peach.
And a big thank you for listening.